Welcome to Ebony 26, The Stories. I hope that you enjoy.
Once upon a time, there was this fox. His name was Ben. I say was because Ben is now dead. At one time, he was here, though, on this same planet that I live on, and I assume you also are living on. You're not dead yet, are you? Anyway, this particular fox was an interesting individual. Yes, he was quick, agile, and cunning like most his brothers, sisters, and ancestors, but he embodied a sense of intellect that surpassed even the most learned foxes of his time. You may have noticed that I said sister and not sisters, as I labeled his siblings in an impersonal list. You see, Ben's mother passed away, allegedly from grief after giving birth to a 14th son, and unlike most fox parents, she had always wanted a den full of daughters, the female fox being to her the most beautiful and awe-inspiring creature in existence, at least in her incomplete internal encyclopedia of animals. To her, they even surpassed the immortal figure of a human female. Alas, she was destined to deliver only one into the forest world. Ben was her 15th child and 14th son that she gave birth to as she drew her last breath. It is said that the look of remorse in her eyes as she looked into his stilled his heart and pierced the air around them with a red pain you could almost hear between the rustling of her husband's paws on the pine-strewn floor of their home as he paced back and forth on all fours in tense contemplation. A few moments after this, she took her last breath as Ben gasped down his first. And from the beginning, in that moment, there was also born a glimmer in Ben's eyes of a razor-like quality. There were no cries emitted by him, only a panting as he seemed even then to gain an understanding of what type of circumstances he was both a part of and intervening with. He panted. And then he became still. In his own multiverse of newborn contemplation, he allowed his senses to become a part of reality and embraced them in the quiet. His father became a statue as he lowered his eyes to meet Ben's for the first time. There were 3 or 4 onlookers outside the entrance of the den, and they, too, were afraid to amend their silent poses. Ben felt all of this, and was, within his first few moments of life, discomforted with it. Miles away from the den at the same time as Ben's birthing, an old and brittle rainbow trout named Caldulan was pondering the submerged half of a great rock at the base of a long and narrow set of rapids. Caldulan was very fond of this rock. It maintained a seductive, muddy orange tint under the surface of the rippling waters in the daylight, and became a hissing moonstone by which he sometimes slept when he felt the need to rest. It was not often in his long life that he had truly felt like sleeping, and it was even fewer the times he saw the point of sleep. To him, there were far too many contemplations to be sought out, such as how so many of his friends were seduced into capture in the Netherlands, or why so many flies ceaselessly continued to taunt the surface of the world, mocking their fate beneath the opaque ripples. Caldulan was, during this particular contemplation session, wondering as to the pattern of bubbling occurring on the edge of his world. These bubbles were, he thought, a bridge between the two worlds. They contained, he assumed, qualities from both the wet, careful world, as well as from the unstable, arid world. This made them important, he was sure. He just did not know in what way, or to what degree. Surely they were not to be passed off as unnecessary filler material. Caldulan had faith that in all things purpose could be found if sought for long and hard enough. His current quandary was the patterns in which these connectors of worlds appeared. It had vexed him before that no perceivable pattern could be made out among either their positioning of appearances or their longevity of life, and so he had set out once again to try and decipher their code. For a couple of hours he had tried to visually detect a melody in their appearances to no avail. There were certain spots where bubbles very regularly popped up, but he still could not figure out any pattern of the bubbles as a whole. There was no perceivable association between the appearance of Bubble A in Location 1 and Bubble B in Location 2, for instance. Now, after toiling over his observations with no new knowledge, Caldulan was taking a philosophical breaststroke back to look at the scenario from another angle. Were the bubbles even connected at all, or did they exist extraneously and in isolation as individual entities? Were they tools of the water, instruments of the air, or masters of both? And if they were the masters, did they individually control specific parts or collectively oversee all? Or were they simply another one of the river's many secret voices, whispering incessantly and comfortingly? Caldulan was inclined to hypothesize that this latter suggestion was the truth, and had almost reached a point of mental self-satisfaction with the question when he noticed a larger-than-normal bubble that had formed right above him. A ray of sun glistened on its spherical apex and sent a quiver of doubt down Caldulan's throat, causing him to shift from his floating and comfortable position, bumping into the river's moonstone, which he had until this point never profaned by touching with his mortal body. Caldulan wept amber tears of light as his mind raced to understand what it was understanding. It was all white and muddy and shaken and flurried and lightning and unmanageability for moments upon moments under that great rock, until suddenly Caldulan was struck again, this time by an epiphany which to this day he floats complacently trying to remember. In parallel time to the time right before Caldulan's epiphany, a hunger awoke. It was not sure where it belonged, but was restless in its concern. It looked down upon its shapeless shadow and clutched closer to the ground. Realizing its peril should it remain alone and formless, it threw out from under a tree's roots an apparition of itself and began pursuit. In a windy movement, and within the idea of the chase, this hunger grasped purpose, fleeting but definable. Barely understanding nothing, it soared into a storm cloud and received solace from it. The cloud told it of great things, mysteries and novelties, tragedies and disease, places and ideas, thoughts and prayers. The cloud went on to reveal purposes and conditions, balance and disorders, certainties and vagaries. It evolved the hunger into a palpable energy over several centuries and digressed as to the creations devised on the surface and the proper methods of infiltration. For years and years and years, the energy was transformed, perfected, and molded into an aura, and the cloud envisioned great things for it. Finally, one evening, the aura became intensely alert, and inside of it the hunger that still lingered shook itself with rage, and the Trinity plunged out of the sky and into a man who had just decided to jog. Feeling very motivated and nauseous, the man ran for 3 hours before vomiting on the base of a quiet tree. Not long after this, a man and a woman paused while walking past this tree and were struck by its shape. They opted to sit beneath it, for its base was shaped in such a way that provoked you to sit down, if only for a moment. Its roots marked their place under the soil and molded the ground on the tree's north side in a bowl-like fashion. It was a massive tree, and the couple sat down in its bowl. During their stay, their need for words was removed from them unknowingly. They reclined together, yet felt comfortably alone. As he sat there, his mind drifted purposely to the color blue, and his air tasted bitter. As she sat there, her thoughts became an acorn, and she felt metallic. Reason was an absent force, and neither party could distinguish harmony from dissonance. Their need to depart was gigantic, but it was not until several hours had passed that their legs carried them back down their trail. Later, they would reflect back on the time spent under the tree and would wonder where it went, for they had no conception of how much had passed while within its grasp. During their stay within the tree, though, there unraveled an equally magnificent event. On the other side of the world, it was nighttime, and many children were being sent to bed. None of these children knew the couple under the tree, or that such an alluring tree even existed. One small boy, who had yet to learn what the word allure meant, already lay in bed. His pose of pre-sleep was extremely comfortable for the first 10 minutes. Unfortunately, he was startled by the brushing of tree branches on his window after 11 minutes of lying down. It was not an unknown noise to him, because the breeze would often cause those limbs to converse with his window. On this evening, though, it awoke in him a sense of dread. Grasping to an inkling of sanity he saved for times such as these, he forced his eyes shut and fervently expected sleep. The dread and the sanity waged a war of epic and global proportions inside of him. They gathered intelligence and counterintelligence and operative intelligence and nonlinear intelligence and persuasive intelligence and shifting intelligence and drastic intelligence and smooth intelligence and every other type of intelligence that they could on their adversary. They fought and bled and schemed and infiltrated and tore and sieged and burned and died and birthed and bled, and he felt all of this occurring in him and thought that in consciousness sanity might be reinforced and prevail. Just as this thought came to him, though, he felt dread's hammer deliver a final blow to his hopes. In a cyclone of hurried anticipation, a bead of sweat formed on his brow and seemed to hover above his skin. It spoke in drippy tones and fallacies. It devoured the last bits of weariness his body contained and nourished the plague in his mind. Coaxing and testing, it drove him to a breaking point, only a different one this time. Blind and maddened by the permeating dread, he tore out of bed and instead of sterilizing his sanctuary with light, dove with unsurpassed agility toward the window. Throwing it open, he stared into the face of his nemesis before thrashing out mercilessly at it. In a stirring dance of staccato and crescendos, he maimed the face and the branches terribly, and once satisfied with his destruction, returned to bed, exhausted and complete. A cough coerced its way out of the man behind the desk. Unkempt hair and barefoot feet were the only things he was certain of until he coughed. A little annoyed, he shifted his weight to the left side of his oversized chair. He was larger than most people behind desks and had pudgy, clumsy hands. He tried twirling a pencil between his fingers a few times before giving up again. It was one of his life goals to do this with prowess and ability. If only this skill could be conquered, he would probably perform better at his work. Currently, his work consisted of typing figures into the machine in front of him at a struggling pace. It was this pace that prohibited any promotions from being attained. Being given promotions was another of his life goals. Sadly, he thought again, his only one had been received several years prior to his cough. At this dull observation, he punched a few figures and one sentence into the machine. As it accepted his entries, he thought about the psychology of the machine. It was clearly greater than he in regards to usefulness and insightfulness, but was also constricted to being only as good as he made it to be. He regarded this for a minute, shifted his bulk again, this time to the right, and inputted a couple more figures. He grinned to himself and glanced over the machine and down the corridor. His pencil fell again, and his throat started to itch. Certain a heart attack was sure to follow, he shut the machine down completely and went home to bed. He dreamed about writing a novel and twirling pencils at book signings. He dreamed of machines and religions, and then he woke. Before this man woke, a sparrow flew silently above his house and glided into a tree in his neighbor's yard. As it sat on a branch high above the rooftops, it pondered the morning air. It was good air. The air right before first light, where there is mist around the ground and electricity in between tree branches. It was clean air, the air unsaturated by luxury and noise. It was free air, devoid of necessaries and complications, when sight is lengthened and hearing is heightened. The sparrow sang about these things for a moment, and then sat in reflection again as a glow began to envelop the horizon. It was the glow of possibility wrought with misfortune. It was the glow of inevitability shot through with hope and falsities. The sparrow sang about this for a minute and became still once again. A preparation was necessary before plunging into new light, and the sparrow held close its ritual, pacing up and down the branch with intermittent flourishes to neighboring limbs. It sang in chirps and harks and glassy broken chords, reciting psalms that were a part of the new beginning. It trudged along its branches until it reached a point of certainty within itself. The horizon then became awash in flame, and the sparrow sang about this for some time,